Hey everyone, Leroy here. So, question, do you need a new drum machine in your life? The answer for me is simple. I need 900 new drum machines in my life because I'm obsessed with drum machines. However, the answer for you might be a little bit different. Fortunately for us, Korg have delivered a brand new drum machine called the Drumlogue. The Drumlogue is a hybrid digital and analog drum machine. So you and I in this video together are going to go through this drum machine, see what I can do, see how it sounds, and maybe by the end of this video, you might answer the question, do you need a new drum machine in your life? Let's run the intro. So when it comes to drum machines, there's obviously a plethora of drum machines out there. We've got the great legacy from all the Roland drum machines. Arturia have some amazing drum machines. The amazing reputation from Electron. We've even got the Dave Smith Tempest here. And you might even be familiar with some of Korg's own drum machines, the Volca Drum and the classic Volca Beats. Which are some of your favorites? Let us know in the comments. But let's get straight stuck into the Drumlogue. So you might be familiar with Korg's log range of synthesizers. There's the Minilog, Monologue, Prolog, and the Minilog XD. And this is obviously a kind of addition to that range, hence the name Drumlogue. And it shares a few similarities to some of those synthesizers, particularly the Minilog XD. So this is a hybrid drum machine, meaning it features analog sounds as well as digital sounds, including the multi-engine oscillator that was found in the Prolog and the Minilog XD. And when I first got this, I was kind of not surprised at how small it was, but I was quite interested in sort of the sizing that they've done here. And it's kind of got a really nice sort of form factor. It's all sort of, there's like a knob pretty much per function. So each I can use these pads here to trigger the individual sounds, and I have the parameters to control the way that those sounds sound. So this is my kick drum, and these are all the pots here to control all of the actual decay, tune, and drive, and each sound has its own controls. Even the knobs here are very similar to the controls that you find on the log lineup of synthesizers. So there's a lot of sort of design features that are being brought forward from those synths. The faceplate is made of all metal and it's built really well. In fact, the faceplate looks very similar to the faceplate that you find on the Prolog synthesizer. It's really nice and sort of polished steel, and it feels really great. We have a display here which helps us navigate through all of our menus to change the way that sounds sound and edit steps. In fact, this display, it looks like a little sort of MIDI clip that you might see in something like Ableton Live, and it shows you the steps that are in your sequence. On the back, we've got kind of all the usual suspects. Really happy to see some multiple outputs here so we can multi-track individual drum sounds in our digital audio workstation, which is also a really handy thing to have. Plus all the other usual suspects like MIDI in and out. We've also got the TRS style syncing. There's even an audio input, which I haven't really discovered yet. I haven't really used it a lot just yet, but I'm sure we'll follow up with another video on that. We have two USB ports as well. One is for connecting a MIDI controller, so if you want to be able to sequence and play these sounds via a MIDI controller, you can, as well as a USB type B. That's for, kind of connecting this to your computer and saving patches and exporting samples and all that kind of good stuff. So ever since the 80s, or the introduction of drum machines, and as drum machines have evolved, they've always incorporated either digital or analog drum sounds. And the Drumlogue kind of builds on that concept, combining both analog and digital drum sounding parts. So let's dive in a little bit deeper. So here we have our analog section, all right? And so we have 4 analog parts. We have a bass drum, and you can see that these are the parameters here that are used to control the way that that sounds. Whoa. We're kind of moving into bassline territory right now. Add some drive. The buttons are really clicky. We got our snare drum. So we have a snappiness parameter and decay, low tom and high tom, and these are controlled on this sort of lane here. You need to activate the shift modifier to change the tune and pitch and decay of the high tom, which is a little bit annoying. Nonetheless, we can make it work. And then here we have our digital part, so it's all laid out in the faceplate. So we've got closed hat, open hat, rim shot, clap, and 2 samples, all right? So let's take a look at the analog parts first. So in addition, what I've discovered is you can actually modify the analog parts, which is really interesting because many drum machines on the market that have analog parts don't allow you to do this. They only allow you to control basic pitch and tune. So if I select an analog part and I can cycle through these different presets to change the transient for this particular part. And we have sort of 16 in total. So some of them add like a click or like a pitch envelope or something like that to really change the characteristic of that sound, which I find really, really interesting. We can do the same for the snare drum. The snare drum will change the snappiness or modifies the snappiness with multiple different presets for each. The low tom adds a new layer. So we have, so you can hear there's that analog element from underneath as well as this kind of sound layer that sits on top. I'm not too sure what it is, but from just working with it, you can kind of tell what's going on there. Really cool. With the digital parts, we can actually change what those sounds are, and we can cycle through multiple banks of sounds. So these knobs here kind of correlate to the menus. It's a little kind of weird to work with because they don't properly line up, but you can kind of figure it out after mucking around with it for a while. So here I can change the closed hat, or I could change the closed hat to be something completely different. So it could be a miscellaneous percussion element. So there's a lot of scope for adding different sounds. You're not limited to just a closed hat or an open hat. But for this, let's just keep it back on the closed hat. So you got your closed hat, open hat, rim shot, and your clap. And then you got your 2 sample layers. So these are kind of all more or less the same, I'm pretty sure. It's just, the way it's laid out is to let you know that you've got these 2 sample layers that can add something a little different than just another drum machine sound. Cool. And then at the end here, we have this multi-section. So this is where it gets really interesting, and users of the Minilogue XD and the Prologue might be familiar with this. Even NTS1 users, this is kind of Korg's customizable user oscillator. So it comes with a bunch of its own presets. And but it's also an open source coding sort of synth, and you can design your own patches via Korg's SDK software, which is really interesting. You can download them off the internet and import them in and kind of create your own. It's very, very customizable. But by default, we have a few different types of sounds. And again, if we select that sound, we've got different presets that we can, oh, that's the one. Where am I? Oh, here we go. You can see doesn't really line up, but we can get there in the end. Wild. I like this one. And then when we cycle through the pages, we've got different parameters that we can sort of change the way that this sounds. So I can change the pitch, the note, index, which I think is Korg's language for, sounds like a filter or frequency modulation. I'm not too sure. I need to ask Korg about this one. And the ratio. The only thing I realize that you can't do is you can't play this sound chromatically with the pads. I imagine you'd need like a MIDI controller to be able to do that, which is a little bit annoying, but maybe I'm wrong. And then there's also, if I press part, we can change the multi-engine to play either a VPM, which stands for variable pulse modulation, or a noise element. So this could be good for modulating and creating like a percussive element or something like that. To me, noise is really important for creating interesting drum machine sounds like snares and hats. You had enough of me talking yet? Let's take a listen. Some drive. Whoa. My mind goes straight to just motion sequencing that. Hear the clickiness of that button? It might sound a bit annoying on camera, but to me, it's really very satisfying, especially when auditioning the sounds. Let us know what you think in the comments. All right, enough mucking around. Let's actually build a track from scratch. So do you know what motion sequencing is? Of course you do, because you're all professionals out there. However, for those who don't, motion sequencing is the ability to kind of like record a parameter movement. It's kind of like clip automation in live. And the Volkers did this really well. You press motion sequencing, twist a knob, and it would record that movement. It's kind of like automation. And it really opens up the possibilities for sound design and sequencing and all that kind of stuff. And it's firmly embedded in the Drumlogue. In fact, there's a button dedicated to it called Motion. So it's probably a really good place to start for sequencing this track I'm about to sequence. So I'm going to work with these two samples here, and each one is kind of a different percussive sounding sample. And so when I have the live button engaged, that means I can audition the samples or the sounds individually. But when I hit step, it means I can sequence them in the step sequencer. So it's a 16-step sequencer by default. Expandable to 64 steps. And what I'm going to do now is I can just hit play. So there we go, standard sequence. And you can see it's laid down those steps in the little display there. And I'm going to use the motion sequence to sort of change the samples over the course of this sequence by pressing motion, hitting record, and changing the sample select knob as I go through. Cool. All right. So the motion layer has recorded my movement of that, so it's changing the samples as I go through that sequence. So it's just really fun and random and just kind of gives you something different every single time. All right. Now I'm going to go and do that for the second one. This one here. All right. So motion, play, and record. Whoops, I need to enter in the sequence first. So I'll just go live. Yep. step, boom. All right, there we go. Okay. Now up here we have little tiny volume knobs for each sound. They're really small. They look like the same sort of style knobs as what you have on a Volca, and they're kind of hard to get your fingers around. But I suppose it's a good thing to have this, just in case you didn't want to accidentally bump the volume of something. And I'm just going to turn down the volume of sample layer 2. All right, sounds pretty weird and cool. Now let's move on to another sound. So here we go with the kick drum. Oh, mental. Gets me every time. All right, so step 1, 5, 9, 13, and I'll put one on the 16. And if I hit accent button and hold down the step, I can change the volume of each individual step, or the accent. So it's kind of like per step velocity or something like that. You can even apply a ratchet, so it will play either 2, 3, 4 notes per step. So for anyone wanting to use those kind of like ratcheting hi-hats, it's really good for that. But I'll just leave it like that for now. Cool. Next sound. So live, I'm going to clap. Here we go. Step 5, 9, and let's do like a little thing there. Accent, change the volume of those two, or the accent of those two there. And you can actually see, I don't know if you can see that in the camera, but the sort of opacity of the step lights actually dims when you change the accent of it, which is kind of a nice touch to give you a indication that it's actually changed the accent of those two steps. Cool. All right, and now let's get some hats live. Yep. 3. Oops. So step 3, 7, 9. Let's get a couple there. I think I accidentally programmed the low tom. That's okay. Let's just go live. Yep, that's the one I want. Step. Bleh, bleh, bleh. And last of all, I'm going to get the close hats. Step. Bup, bup, bup. Now you can start to do some cool stuff from here. So once you kind of get like a bit of a groove going, we can start to introduce a few things that are pretty important to beat making, like swing and groove. This is right directly underneath the time button. If I hit shift and press groove, I'm able to enter in some swing. Super important. Cool. And then if I go to loop, if I select the sound, which is going to be the hats, and hit step, I can start to do some other cool stuff like randomization and probability. So when you're in the step mode and you press down on a step, you can change the probability that that step will occur. So by default, it's always set to 100. It's that one there. So I could change the probability that each of these will occur to kind of create some randomization, which is always really interesting. And I could even do that to some of the, I won't do it to the kick, I'll keep that consistent. And let's do it to the sample sound to make that even more random. So we'll go step, and I'll just enter in a few. So as you can see, this is really fun. We're only just scratching the surface with this. Did somebody say effects? It's a pretty good call. Effects are pretty important. And on the Drumlogue, we have two effects. We have a delay and we have a reverb. Plus there is a master effect lane as well. And we can assign, we can send sounds to the effects as well. So if I hit snare, I generally like to add a little bit of reverb to snares. If I use this knob here and these buttons, cycle through the parameters for the snare. Here we go. I can assign volume or send to the effects. And if I go to the effects on the end here, I can change the effect type as well. So I can select the preset of the effect. Oops. And I can change the parameters of how those effects sound as well. So we've got input, brightness, time, all that kind of good stuff. And on the master channel, don't worry, we haven't forgotten. Yes, you can add compressors and EQs on the master as well. And we can press the master button and cycle through the different effects type that you can put on the master. So we've got a compressor, filter, EQ, all that kind of good thing. And we can use these page buttons here to cycle through the different parameters for those effects types. So, final thoughts on the Drumlogue. Do you really care, in my opinion? I'm going to tell you anyway. I love how this sounds. It sounds great. I love the analog componentry of this and the ability that has for adding in a digital element as well. The sound design possibilities on this are really great. Being able to modulate or change subtly the way that the analog parts sound is really good. Plus the onboard digital samples that come with the Drumlogue are really great as well. I've always been a fan of how Korg does step sequencing, and its kooky little things like motion recording and randomization also work really well. I think it's a great idea that they've added multiple outputs as well. Super handy thing to have. I love being able to independently record kick drums and snare drums on independent audio channels inside Ableton Live. So that's super handy thing, and it's a great thing that they've added that. And the ability to be able to connect a MIDI controller to this, I think, is quite a good option. Lastly, the VPN or the multi-engine, the digital multi-engine that they've included or brought forward from the Minilog XD or the NTS1 is a great option as well. It really expands further the ability to add, a more of a sound designed element as well. So it's not just a drum machine. You can push it a little bit further than that. Some things I might question, these little volume knobs up the top here, very small and a little bit hard to get your fingers around, but it's probably a good thing really if you were performing on stage and you didn't want to accidentally bump the volume of your kick drum mid-performance. It's probably quite handy. And the display is a little small, still works fine, and it gives you access to all the parameters you need. Some of the encoders don't line up properly, but I mean, I've only had this for a couple of days and haven't really read the manual, so maybe I'm doing something wrong. The size is actually kind of perfect. However, if it was a little bit bigger, it probably would be a good thing as well to have some more real estate, to add some more knobs to fit some of the extra sounds in there. So you've got controlling 2 sounds on 1 layer. That might have been nice, but then again, you know, having this the size it is fits perfectly on my desktop, and I'm actually obsessed with desktop synths anyway. I'm loving the dark sort of design aesthetic of this. It's very techno, it's very cool. Some of the text on the faceplate's a little bit difficult to read, but it's really great that each individual button is backlit, so it's really bright and easy to see. Also really love the ability to, when you're programming in the accents, you can change the opacity or see the brightness changes per step. It's really kind of a nice touch. So, have we answered your question? Do you need a new drum machine? Is this the drum machine for you? I love it. I think it sounds great, but we want to know from you. So, thanks for watching the video. Until next time, see you later.